Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by aliens who look a lot like humans. Because why would another planet produce anything different? Now, let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Onion Dew. For that refreshing jolt of onion juice, pop an Onion Dew.
It was for the first 5 minutes laughing at the sponsor.
Welcome everyone to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I'm Todd.
And we're filmmakers who, like to review and look at films for what we can learn, take away. And so we like to break it apart and see what makes this thing tick. What's the goal? We like to watch a film not just, from the standpoint of a viewer and what we experience as a viewer and what we can take away from that experience as creators, but also like to try to go with the filmmaker, right? It doesn't make sense to watch a movie and then judge it based on what you wanted the movie to be. That's not a good way. That's a bad participant. Like, you need to watch the movie that the director made, not the one you were hoping they would make. Because a lot of times, the marketing team gets a hold of your stuff and they are just trying to sell tickets. And so it's not really their fault if you're walking in with a false expectation. The best thing you can do as a viewer is to sit, no matter what you expected walking in, and then let the movie come to you. And then you go along for the ride. And then based on that, did you have a good time? Did you enjoy yourself? Then you can judge the movie, but only on its own terms. Like if you go in, to a fantasy film expecting a comedy, it's not really the director's fault. Like, he made the movie or she made the movie that they were trying to make and put you into an experience that they were trying to let you have. And the whole time you are just resenting them because you didn't laugh one time. Well, I'm sorry, Tolkien. This isn't what I wanted. Like, that's probably not a fair way to approach a film. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm pretty good about that. Like, trying to let the movie dictate the terms so that then I can judge, okay, was this a good experience for me? Why or why not? Or did the filmmaker execute the ideas that they were trying to execute? Because once you have that perspective, I think you can also start to analyze, well, did they actually fulfill their promises that their film was making? That's one thing. That's okay. Because you can create expectations and setups that you don't pay off or that you don't really fulfill in a meaningful way. Judge it by all means on those terms. I'm just talking about letting the movie dictate the terms itself. And yeah, do you feel like you're pretty good about that, letting the movie come to you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's why I can like a lot of movies instead of, being a hater. There's a lot of reasons to not like things in this world. And so I've always tried to not be that person that looks at something for what I want it to be. And just like you said, I go into things ready to like them as opposed to ready to hate them. I really try to have that whole, we talked about it last week, I think, where I really tried to have this whole, I'm ready to laugh when I go to see a comedy show, kind of mentality, like, I'm there, entertain me, let's do this. Yeah. I'm here for you, I'm here to like your film. So you have to give me a reason not to like it. That means not bringing in my own expectation of what something should be. Now, it's not always the easiest to do. Mm-hmm. If you go into a scary film, you go in, expecting to be scared. And so if it's just not scary, well, I mean, then don't, it's a scary film. It sets up expectation, right? Yeah. But if I know kind of halfway through, okay, that's not what this is. What this is more entertainment value, or it's more of a thriller than it is a horror or something. I'm pretty good at shifting my expectation in the moment to then say, okay, now what I know I had that expectation for the first 30 minutes of what I just watched. I'm going to shift my expectation now and turn it into, okay, this is a thriller, not a horror. Okay, cool. And I'm able to like kind of almost go backward in time and reassess what I've watched leading into the rest of the film. Maybe that's because I've watched a lot of movies. Maybe that's because I'm just forgiving. I don't know. But I think really there's so much shit in the world and so many reasons to hate things that I just want to be happy with things that I love. So if it's music at that time, cool, then I'm going to find a reason to like a song that's on, as opposed to saying, like, there are certain artists I cannot stand, but I try to pull out interesting things of some of their songs. I think same thing for film. There's some directors I just don't like, or some types of movies that I just don't like. But that doesn't mean that I can't look at the cinematography and say, man, that camera movement was crazy cool, or that the lighting that they're doing right now is super motivated and awesome, or the way that person delivered that line, was really terrible, but it was necessary because of this thing that happens 5 minutes later. So yeah, I think I'm pretty good.
Agreed. And it is always challenging, especially in our culture where you're constantly being marketed to then be able to walk in with a fresh slate and say, okay, now what is this thing for real? And I think you are right. You're really good at that. It's easier for me just because, most of the world is I avoid trailers. Like I watch movies I've never heard of. And so whenever you're doing that, and I think you do that a lot too, but, I know whenever I walk into a movie theater, I have no expectations already. So I really just get to exist and see whatever happens, because there's been no trailer moments that I'm anticipating. And that's a really fun way. Now, I also watch a lot of bad movies because of that. And so that's the trade-off. But when those great ones hit, man, that's such a rush to get sucked into a world that I didn't see coming. That's really, really fun too. And so what world are we diving into today, man?
Today we are diving into the world of Evil Dead 2. So if you haven't seen this film, please pause this episode and go watch it, because we're going to spoil a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I suppose. So,
sure. Well, I mean, we'll talk about things that will, maybe affect the way that you watch it if you haven't yet.
True. Very good point. And so we'll look at a bunch of things. Some of the cinematography, the style, story, and budget of shooting, some things. And we'll also dive into some of the story and writing, cutting to the chase, motivating character choices, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. Ash Williams, the lone survivor of an earlier onslaught of flesh-possessing spirits, holes up in a cabin with a group of strangers while the demons continue their attack. It's directed by Sam Raimi, written by Sam Raimi and Scott Spiegel, cinematography by Peter Deming, featuring Bruce Campbell as Ash, Kassie Wesley as Bobby Joe, Denise Bixler as Linda, Richard Domeier as Ed, John Peaks as the professor, and Sarah Berry as Annie.
This is Professor Raymond Noby, Department of Ancient History, log entry number 2. I believe I have made a significant find in the castle of Kandar. Having journeyed there with my wife Henrietta, my daughter Annie, and Associate Professor Ed Gedley. It was in the rear chamber of the castle that we stumbled upon something remarkable. Naturam de Monto, the Book of the Dead. My wife and I brought the book to this cabin, where I could study it undisturbed. It was here that I began the translations. The book speaks of a spiritual presence, a thing of evil that roams the forests and the dark bowers of man's domain. It is through the recitation of the book's passages that this dark spirit is given license to possess the living. Recorded here are the phonetic pronunciations of those passages. Kanda, Estrata, Amantos.
Egress, Gut.
you're relatively new. I mean, I know you've been aware of Evil Dead probably for many, many years. But I think this is your first foray into Sam Raimi's Evil Dead series. How was what? Speaking of expectations, what did you expect coming in, and what did you get?
So, it's funny when my bandmates love this movie and have talked about it for 20 years, and everything, and it just adore it. And I just never spent the time to watch it, right? And so because they like it and I know them, I kind of expected what I got. You know what I mean? Like they like the stuff that, I mean, I don't like everything they like. They like The Room. Yeah. I hate that movie. I don't care who you are or whatever. It is the worst movie ever made because it thinks it's good. Right. That's why.
Yes.
This movie is fantastic because it knows what it is and what it's doing, and it just goes straight at it, right? The performances, I mean, just watch it with the sound off.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say. I'll say, watch it with the sound off, and you'll know exactly what this movie is. And, it's funny, when you think of a movie like this, you think, man, this must have been kind of difficult to direct. Because you have to maintain, it's one thing if you're trying to make a scary movie, right? A legitimately scary movie that everything has to feel heavy and it has to feel, motivated, and the performances have to feel believable, and you've got to bring it all the time. A movie like this, it's almost like the point is to not bring it, is to but if you watch it with the sound off, which I watched it with the sound on the first time, obviously, but then I just kind of put it on in the background as I was doing some other stuff. And it really helped inform how I think the directing, how Sam Raimi like actually did this, of like, I'm going to picture this in my head and create the picture in my head as opposed to making the full, like a full, horror film style. The performances are way over the top and crazy. The visuals are nuts. And it works. It totally works. It's so much fun. So that's how you make a fun horror film, I guess. This is a good example of that, right? Like the wildness of the zombie's eye popping out and going into the girl's mouth, and it's just crazy. But the camera movements are great. The sound, I know I said watch it with the sound off to get an idea of that, and that is an interesting way to do it. But the sound is fantastic. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. When there's a moment too specifically where they're all in the room, and I don't know, I think it's maybe halfway through, maybe less than halfway through, and the sound just keeps happening in different places. And all their heads keep turning. Oh, I see it. I hear it over here. Now I hear it over there. Now I hear it here. And that moment was really cool because each of those sounds had to be slightly different, but still familiar and the same and similar to the last one. And they were really aggressive. And I mean, this is an older film, so the mix is terrible and it hurts your ears. Right. And there's way too much 4K in it, so it hurts your. It's like really painful to listen to. So like really loud sounds are even more painful to listen to. But for some reason, those loud sounds in this film aren't any harder to listen to than the rest of the movie. It's really well done in that regard. I knew what this movie was very early on, but I especially knew what it was during this one shot when he's running after he's at that ridiculous scene where he goes to the bridge and the bridge is washed out and he's standing there on the edge like, yeah, screaming. I'm thinking, okay, I've already known what this movie is, but now I really know what it is. But right after that, when the ghost or the camera, which I think is brilliant, that the camera is the ghost in some of these shots, right? And you're running from the camera, from the ghost. I think it's really cool. And remember, what year is this?
This is 87.
87? Yeah. So yeah, it's early on. During that shot, when the ghost comes up over the bridge and he's running from the ghost in the car, we're in the car and it's day, and then it's just night.
That's a
one shot.
I did not think about that. You're absolutely right.
Dude, it was. How could you not think about that? I thought that had to be part of your notes, right?
Oh, that's so good. Hold on.
Yeah, I don't even know where it is. It might be, I don't know, 15 minutes in. So anyway, that's just fantastic. It's day and then you cut and it's night. You're like, okay, why not? Sure. And the scene that I was talking about the sound, I think happening in multiple places, I think it's like 45 minutes in. This movie is fast. It goes fast. It gets into the action really quickly. I mean, we see a ghost, takes his girlfriend within the first 5 minutes or something. It's like really, really quick. And then stuff just continues to happen and you never know what's going to happen next. It's so much fun. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm laughing here because I'm, scrubbing through the film. And you're right. It is an interesting sequence because that bridge scene happens and the sun suddenly sets, and it's a really cool shot of him being kind of superimposed next to the sun as it's quickly setting, and they're doing some kind of time lapse thing with it. But then he gets and so then they cut to nighttime, and it's that big dramatic shot of him. Oh no, I guess it is still daylight. It looks like nighttime because you're down in the ravine, but it comes over the bridge, the busted up bridge, and it is still daytime. Clearly, even though the sun is set, we're still clearly in daytime. They're giving a dusk vibe, like a twilight. And then there is just one jump cut from inside to outside the car, and we're just pitch black.
I mean.
It works.
Why not? It works. Sure, it works.
Sure, it works.
But it works because it's been set up to work.
Yeah.
You've been told in multiple different ways. This is how, what this movie is going to be. They also do these really cool kind of squishy lens looking kind of turns with the camera, where the camera will turn and you'll see you'll see the image kind of stretch and bend and squish in and whatever. So it just feels off and, it's tilted and everything. And also the blood doesn't really look like blood, because blood is very dark. It's very black. If you've ever seen a lot of blood, this is very bright red, and so it's less scary, I would say, and more, stressful because something happened. They're telling you something happened, but it's not like it just doesn't look as real, I guess I would say. Yeah. So anyway, I adored it. I thought it was fantastic because it knew what it was and it stayed in that lane. It didn't try to be too serious, even though people are dying all around you and there's drama happening. I thought that because of that, the performances were so much fun. I mean, Bruce Campbell is fantastic in this. He's just way over the top, cutting his hand off and, strapping the chainsaw to is just perfect.
Yeah. Whenever I think of like camp, this is like, to me, the epitome of a campy film. Because it's leaning in. I think there's other horror films that are campy, but they're not aware of it. Yes. Here they're entirely aware of what they're doing. And they're going all the way. I mean, the laughing sequence alone is just overwrought. Like it's like the mounted head turns and starts laughing and it's got this crazy squeal to it. Then the whole room starts laughing, the books, like everything is, and then he joins in and is laughing and he does that little like half squat, like a cartoon from the 20s. And he's like, and then everyone stops on a dime and he pulls his gun. Like that's all very self-aware, and just having a really fun time. Like, which to me is really funny because I saw this for the first time. This is another adventure in Wes seeing inappropriate movies at an inappropriate age. Like I probably saw this when I was 6 or 7 years old. And to me, it wasn't funny. It was scary. Like I was terrified of the ballerina scene, and that's how it's always lived in my head. It's a ballerina corpse dancing around in the yard. His girlfriend, right? Who isn't a ballerina?
Yeah.
Like, but as a kid, like I didn't really make the connections of everything that was happening. I just saw a dead girl crawl out of the grave, slap her head on, and start pirouetting. Like, that was scary for me, and I loved it. Like, don't get me wrong, like I had a really good time with this movie, but the comedy side did not occur to me whatsoever as a kid. And now as an adult watching this, I was like, oh, this is really funny. And entertaining, I think, is the right word. Because some of it, like, I may not necessarily laugh at, but I am having a good time, and enjoying like the silly, campy aspect of it. Even though I wouldn't say I'm someone who enjoys camp. Like, that is not my bag at all. To your point about like your bandmates, we definitely don't like the same movies because they'll want to go and watch The Room or whatever that wizard movie is that they love.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Like Wizards of the Lost Kingdom 2
Lost
or
Kingdom
something.
2. The second one, yes.
It's the second one. Not the first that everyone really loves or whatever.
Yeah. Had to make a second one. And they love all that stuff. I'm just like, I can't do it, guys. I can't do it.
And so like this movie, yeah, it's surprising too, because especially if you're coming off the first one and you're kind of expecting something new and then it's not really new. And then this, by the first half of this movie, you're like, okay, it's a kind of a basic horror film in a lot of ways, right? We're in the woods. There's a demon or spirit or something. And there's a chant from a book. Like, this feels all very normal. And then the deeper into this movie you go, the weirder it gets and the more like outrageous it gets. I think that was a surprise for me watching it this time. Even I think the last time I saw it was probably 10 or 15 years ago. And so it was just kind of vaguely bouncing around in there. And you get to the end and like the trees are alive and like he's stabbing or one with a chainsaw. Like, I'm just like, wait, this thing is not a cheap film that it's pretending to be. Like, you know, the first half of the movie, it's like, how can we shave budget? And that's, I'm sure, a real conversation they were having, but it's not like they really spared budget. Whenever you get to some of these bigger moments, like you have this weird old lady monster with the neck, and all this makeup effects, like even the stuff that they threw on Bruce Campbell, like his possession effects are like pretty big. And in fact, like there's that shot whenever the sun sets and you go to that close up of his eye to see the fog lift, like that's a whole big production. Like for that one shot, and I'm pretty sure it's the only time you see it, they had to have reconstructed like a 5-foot model of his face just so that they can get a close-up of his eye to create the in-camera effect of the fog kind of leaving his eye. There's a cheaper effect that they could have gone with, and they were like, nah, we're going the big route. And this thing, I don't know how much it cost, probably, you know, 5 or 10 million. But they had some budget and they used every ounce of it. And it makes it for a really fun, like exceedingly aggressive use of like crazy, silly things. I mean, we end, you know, in a medieval era with 40 or 50 extras dressed as knights in front of a castle. Like none of that's cheap. That's incredible.
The way to add to that, the way that, and just because it's just, I have it playing here too while you're talking, just talking about that, the way that Bobby Joe dies is fantastic. Like the trees grabbing her, all that whole sequence of editing of the vines wrapping around her and then her being dragged and the vines into her skin and then dragged to the tree, and that mix. So the edit, you go into the darkness of the tree, come out of the darkness of the pages being dropped on the ground and the glass breaking so they could get to the pages. Such a great transition there, you know, just really brilliantly done. And I think that's actually the most, it's funny, that feels like the most real way that anybody dies in this film is how she dies. Well, the most like, I guess, maybe tragic, because I feel like she's just so innocent and she shouldn't have to go through this, but she does, and it's the scariest to me way that somebody dies in the film.
Agreed. And what's interesting, so let's talk about some of the cinematography, like style, story, and budget kind of all coalescing together, because there's so much meticulous shot planning he had to have done. Like talking about that scene, but even the other scene you mentioned before about the noises popping around the room. Every single one of those shots are playing into the next shot. Like it's not like, oh, let's just get coverage of him looking around. There's camera moves that are playing into those looks. And if he looks right, the camera kind of pans with him. And then we cut to the noise coming from a corner of the room, but the camera is like whip panning into that angle and locking. And so all that has to be meticulously thought out by Sam Raimi and Peter Deming. Like they're working together to be like, okay, what is this sequence? Exactly what do we need for it? And so there's a lot of that happening like that. I consider that a toaster cut, the one you're talking about with her being dragged through the forest to the tree. And it's beautiful. Especially whenever you finally get close and she's closing in on the tree. There's an intercutting that's happening with audio, especially because there's her screaming and they're intercutting that with her POV of the tree getting closer and this rising pitch that's kind of leading you into like her final moments. And it's bleeding so nicely. I'm pretty sure they're like fading one to the next so that it's not necessarily super hard cut, but maybe it is a hard cut and it's just so well timed and delivered. But there's like 4 cuts and we're going like from her, looking at her, hearing her scream, looking at what she's seeing of the tree moving closer. And it's all happening like super, super fast. They're probably speed ramping all that stuff, in post. And so it's just 4 cuts of looking at her, looking at the tree, her tree, cut to the glass breaking. Like we go to the black and then the final moment of her death is laced into that shot of the Book of the Dead pages in the glass frame dropping and breaking. Like the sound plays the perfect final kind of mix in that, which it didn't necessarily need because of how well that shot and cut. But whenever you lay in that last final bit of polish, like it all comes together just wonderfully. But there a lot of that. I mean, this whole film has a lot of really meticulous shot planning. Some of the sequences are just so planned out. Intercutting looks with, camera moves highlighting small little character details. And like the long dramatic pause of the scene where you're holding my hand too tight. And he looks at her and we're in a close up, that 2-shot close up. And he looks at her, baby, I ain't holding your hand. This is all campy as hell, right? And then they look at each other. Ash and Annie look down. Then Bobby, Joe, and Ed look down. And then we reveal the demonic hand in hers. And then that cues her fleeing and running away and a whole bunch of other stuff. But all of that, like, you're just planning out, okay, we're going to have a nice long dramatic pause. Let's fill that up with everything that looks right to the viewer. And so you got to hide things. And it's silly, especially in 2024, looking at that sequence, because it's like, wouldn't you just like look down immediately? But no, we're gonna play it up, for effect. Why not?
And to add to that scene, too, something that I noticed, like the lighting is so weird at times. There's power in the cabin. They have electricity in the cabin because they zoom in on the pages and they're under a lamp. That's obviously an electric lamp, right? Yeah. But they have a lantern, and when she knocks the lantern out of her hands and it goes to the ground, the entirety of the place goes dark until they relight the lantern, and now you've got light in the room.
Oh,
what happened to the lamp in the other room?
That's so
the
good.
Multiple lamps that are on, you still have electricity, but the whole place goes dark. Like, obviously, if you're watching for stuff like that, you'll see it. But at first viewing, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I've watched it twice, in the last 2 days and haven't thought about that. because it's so motivated. Like you see a light go out, lights should go out. And
exactly.
It's so wonderfully motivated. You're in the experience. Unless you're actively, like you said, if you're looking for it, then yeah, you can find reasons to be annoyed with anything. But if you're there for the experience, you're not going to think about it. You're in there with the characters.
Yeah, and maybe it's because it's in a different room. The lamp is in a different room, so like we can forget about that lamp because it's in a whole nother room, you know. But we've just seen it, like we just zoomed in on it, and now like less than a minute later, we drop the lantern and it goes out and it goes pitch dark. It's just.
That's awesome.
It's okay because we want to not believe this necessarily, but we want to be entertained and scared, and we buy into all the stuff that Sam Raimi is giving us here.
Yeah.
So anyway,
the other little shot planning thing I really liked is I think the visual effects in this movie are pretty solid. Like for 1987, this kind of film, like this isn't the Spielberg budget, right? He's not in here working with $80 million. But the VFX are, I think, really, really nice. Like the floating head of her dad played really well because it's also mixing in this lighting effect of like these water streaks splashing the wall behind the effect that is being composited later in post, right? But he knows exactly where the head is going to be. He's got everyone's eye line perfect. And then he's also adding in these in-camera visual elements with that little water splash, hitting the wall. And then the lighting, of course, being super dim, like it all plays really, really nicely and well executed. There's one shot, I don't remember where in the movie it happens, but there's a shot of the moon and there's like this smoke that just starts billowing out and starting to cover the moon. And I legit was like, I don't know how they did that. Because it looks so in camera that I don't know how they could have done it in camera because of the way the shot is set up. Like if you were going to do something like that in camera, you might have like a fish tank or something, and then you pour some liquid into the water that can then start to obscure and create that kind of smoky, liquidy effect. But that effect was so far away that I don't see how they could have staged it in camera, because you would have needed that effect to be super near to the camera, and then it would have been out of focus. But the details in it looks really, really sharp to me. And so I'm like, okay, but how did they did it in post, I guess, but that's just created a whole other headache of like, I don't know. Some of the stuff I really don't know how they did for its era. Like in today, yeah, I know thousands of ways you can do that, but then I'm like, I don't know. And yeah, there's and then the little whirlpool effect at the end with being sucked into the gravity well, the portal. I thought that looked really nice. I mean, it's 87, so I mean, let's temper our expectations here, but it looks really nice because it fits very well with the world they created. It doesn't look like some of the hokier, like even Spielberg, I think, if you're talking like Raiders, some of the visual effects in there, I think this looks better than some of the Raiders VFX. You're talking about the arc and that kind of thing. I think this looks a lot better. And yet, this movie doesn't look necessarily better as a whole, but it's being its own thing, and it's super effective at that. So shot planning, he did his freaking homework. It's really impressive. The other thing I really liked, and you already mentioned it, is the POV camera movement. The camera representing like the demon. And I think that's so cool because it embodies the spirit in a really inexpensive way. Like all those shots of the monsters, very expensive. But all those shots are of the spirit possessing someone. Like we never see the spirit out on its own. And so how do you represent that thing if you don't want to see it on camera? You give it a perspective in the world, and that it becomes the camera itself. And I love that because it adds tension as well as style. It's visually telling the story also without any need for dialogue, right? We have this wide angle POV flying through the woods with scary groaning noises and chaotic sounds. Like we get it. It's an evil spirit chasing us. We don't need anything else to spell it out. One, you walked into a movie called Evil Dead. But then two, like it's even, I think if you hadn't seen the title film, if someone just plop this shot of it right in front of you, you would know exactly what's happening. It's just a genius way to tell your story with minimal need of exposition or anything, tipping the hat. It's really, 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 really smart. And it also lets you give a lot of nice, like, cheap kills. Because, like, she gets killed. Whenever she gets pulled through the force, we don't really know exactly how she died. Like, did the tree eat her? Did she just get smacked on the tree? We don't really know. But because we've gotten so used to, I think, this style of camera work, we don't need to see those final moments. It just lives and exists in our head as like, okay, that's that. And we can move on. And in any other movie, we need to see her in some other scene. Like, she comes back. But in this movie, we don't need that. Because there's always some evil presence lurking off camera. And I think stylistically, it all kind of coheses in a really nice way. Another fun, cheap kill to me is Ash puts Linda's evil head in a vice, his ex-girlfriend now, his former girlfriend, and then chainsaws her head. Like, she's like, you don't got to do this. Like, you said we'd be together forever. And he's torn, no, over the top. And then we cut to a shadow being cast against the wall of her head and his chainsaw coming down. And then we just spray blood all over the wall. Like, that's a nice way to kill someone without having to create a whole new model with a whole new effect. But it still adds style and is budget friendly. And so that's a nice combination of, we're getting a kill, we're getting some story, and we're saving money for the other harder effects. And generally, you just want every kill scene to be different anyway. And so this is another way to add variety to the way you're killing characters. So yeah, all that, very smart filmmaking. This guy is a legend for sure. Story and writing wise, this will be fun. My man cuts to the chase like nobody I've ever seen in my life. We spend like 20 seconds getting to the cabin.
Yes.
In that first 8 minutes, like, what do we do? I mean, the first like 2 or 3 minutes of that is just introducing the book. It's a VO shot of the book itself, but that's a really cool like animation thing that's happening. Stop motion, like, of the book being drawn in blood, and the nice shot of red water behind it, and the blood sea and all that kind of stuff. And that takes several minutes, credits and whatnot. And by the time we're into the car, that first 8 minutes, including the opening, is like, they get to the cabin. He unleashes the demon. He kills his girlfriend. He buries his girlfriend. He gets possessed. He gets unpossessed. And then he gets to the bridge. Like, it's any other movie, that's 45 minutes of story.
100%.
And here he's like, well, let's just get to it. I don't know that that's the right or wrong way. I think for this movie, it's obviously the right way. I would probably prefer, give me another 15 minutes of story to flesh some of these things out. But if the point is just to be campy, you know what? Thank you for saving me 15 minutes.
100%.
Because
this movie did not need to be another moment longer. Yes.
Because if that's the point, like, I'm not going to buy into anything you're selling me anyway. So yeah, let's do the fun stuff. And so yeah. They get to the cabin. There's so many super tight edits. Like, when he gets to the bridge, right? He's trying to leave, and he's in his car on his way, and he wipes his face and immediately like slams his brakes because the bridge is destroyed, and he's immediately halfway out the car. Like, it's just bang, 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 bang. And that's, I think, saving time for some of these other sequences that you want to spend more time in, like the chase. That whole sequence of the demon chasing him in the car, and then, he wrecks the car and he gets out and he's running through the house. That sequence running through the house is so cool that it's just never stops. You keep thinking he's run out of room. Like, there's nowhere else for Ash to go. And then there's this other little back hallway, and this hallway leads to this, unfinished space and the walls, and now he's out of the walls, and now he's back into the house. And then Ash does the thing that you never get to see characters do. He disappears, and now the demon is lost. That's awesome. Like, it's a lot of actual tension. Like, it generates for me genuine tension of is he going to get away? And this movie is very, threadbare on that kind of stuff in terms of genuine tension because of how much fun you're having. But those moments that he finds are from stuff like that, of the demon actively pursuing and trying to get at you. That definitely, gets my tension in my shoulders going, and like, crap, what's going to happen next? Because you feel kind of helpless for the character. Like, that's really nice execution and a good use of runtime as opposed
Agreed.
to like, I don't need to see, I guess, any more about you and your girlfriend. You're going to yell and you're going to scream about losing her, but at the same time, like, my man, okay, we'll get to that in a second. The other thing, Ash is possessed, but the sunrise sets him free. Yeah, so they very quickly established the way that the demon works is it cannot survive in the daylight. And that's a nice motivator for us to just stay alive until dawn. Now we kind of know our mission. The sun goes down, crap. We need to just survive the night, which is classic horror storytelling. Like, that doesn't get any more classic than that. And of course, it's reinforced and echoed by the demons all chanting, "Dead by dawn, dead by dawn." And it's all really, really fun. But Annie's boyfriend gets possessed, and Ash, what's interesting about him learning how this whole thing operates is the way he very quickly gets to just murdering people. Like, Ash is not a patient person. He, like, Annie's boyfriend, Annie is the professor's daughter who's there with I love how in like the 70s and 80s, if someone's wealthy, they have a sweater wrapped around their neck. Like, that's a guaranteed way to demonstrate they're educated. And so Annie's boyfriend, kind of the doofus who is more or less along for the ride, and he's, I guess, part of the study of the book. But he gets possessed, and Ash just gets to work. He grabs the axe and hacks this dude apart, even though Ash himself has survived a possession. Like, that's a little suspect on Ash's part. But I think it's really interesting because he also wastes no time killing his own girlfriend. Like, he got straight to it. He's, I guess, an action first kind of guy. Like, is this kind of getting to him as a person? This is character development.
Yeah, I guess so.
In Evil Dead world. Because literally the very first moment, he grabs his shovel and like swaps her head off. And then buries her. I mean, he's in anguish, I guess, while he's doing it, but my man did not explore any options.
No. It was just like, oh, I've been here before. Here you go. Yeah. I'm going to end this right now.
It was real while it lasted.
It was real while it lasted. The way I just kind of like received that was it was just a gut reaction to, grab the first thing he could get and then do something. And then that's what happened. But yeah, I get that.
Oh, that cracked me up. So yeah, let's talk about like motivating character choices. Because Ash makes it very clear he doesn't want to leave the house. Like, the sun has gone down. He's like, no. We wait until dawn. And so how do you get Ash to leave the house? Because we kind of want him to break his rule and go outside because he doesn't want to. So that we kind of want to see what's out there. But you also don't want him to do it arbitrarily. So you want there's that part of you, it's just the curiosity of it. Okay, well, what happens if you do go outside? Like, what's out there, what's waiting for you? And so let's create a need. Bobby Joe goes missing, right? That whole hand bit. And next thing we know, we're cutting and she's sprinting away from the house. And so now her boyfriend, has a desire to go get her because, let's be honest, my man isn't going to do better than Bobby Joe. He's swinging out of his league. And so I totally get that motivation for him wanting to go and find her. And so what does he do? he gets the shotgun and forces everyone to go looking for her. And that allows us to maintain respect for Ash while forcing him into a bad situation. Like, that's a really good, useful writing tool of, you don't want your main character doing stupid things, or else you're going to lose respect for them and stop caring whether or not they live or die. But if you can force them through gunpoint, right, then you know what? It raises the resistance and therefore creates a lot more tension of being out there, and creates sympathy for him instead of that resentment. It's really nice because now he's being forced to go into a situation, and he gets to reiterate, we don't need to go out there, which is a very quick way to, raise the stakes for the viewer of like, oh crap, what's going to happen when he goes out there. That's just a nice little writing tool. The other nice thing I think they did was the chainsaw hand. Like, you got to motivate that. They clearly want a cool chainsaw hand by the end of this movie. And I can imagine that he worked backwards. That he's like, okay, look, I know I want this chainsaw hand, but how are we going to get there, guys? And so you start thinking about, okay, well, let's cut his hand off, but how or why does he lose his hand? And suddenly you have a really huge sequence where you can have him get a demon-possessed hand. That's fun. And we can play with that for a while. And now you have a whole new character in the film, actually. And that can then motivate other things happening. So that's a really smart use of all the assets that you have. It's like, yeah, okay, we want this cool thing, right? Because we want this big finale. And now you have a reason to not just have that. It motivates so many other things within the story itself. And then, of course, you get to the end and you want that big finale. Okay, now we have a reason to slap a montage together that ends with Ash getting his chainsaw hand, right? And it's like this A-team, we're building the van kind of sequence. And it's just tools tightening and soldering and whatever else. And then suddenly he's got a chainsaw that creates a sawed-off shotgun. And you get the fun line, groovy. Does it get any better than that?
No, that's exactly the best thing to write in that moment.
I also love that I think it reinforces they know exactly what they're doing. I think there's some people who might watch this and say, no, he didn't know he's making a silly movie. But when you do something like cut a guy's hand off and then stack a set of books that ends with a farewell to arms.
Yes.
Like, exactly.
Oh, that's a great.
What you're doing.
I picked that up too. Yeah, I was like, oh, okay.
So
yeah,
funny.
It's perfect.
Like, and it's also really smart because if you create your own cover art, it's actually fair use. You can use book covers or book titles in your films. The copyright is actually in the cover art itself. And so if you create your own cover art, that's a budget-friendly way of getting stuff into your frame. And you'll also notice, I don't think he had Hemingway anywhere on there. It was just A Farewell to Arms, a novel or something like that in small type. And so it's a way to get his joke in without having to, get too many lawyers involved about, can we do this? Make your own book art, and you're good to go. Yeah. The other little tidbits, this will go very, very quickly. So much screaming in this movie. Like, there's twice as much screaming as dialogue. And I don't know how you feel about it. It definitely hurts my ears and I have to turn it down. But it's also, I guess, part of the fun. It's, campy. I also think it's really funny that Linda gets taken and suddenly there's smoke and fog everywhere. But it's a horror movie. So you know what? We're in. The other really, really funny thing to me is how Annie, the smart one, tries to close the door with a person halfway in it, like in the doorway.
Twice. His whole body pulls him out, not enough. Then his legs pulls them out.
What is happening? But what's great is it's not just a horror film, it's humor. So you can get away with weird character choices because we don't really need emotional buy-in from the viewer anyway. Like, this is all here for fun and creating kind of tension and letting she just got away kind of moment. Like, that's nice. Also, by the way, really love that our hero, Ash, gets possessed twice in this film. Like in any other horror film, possession is death. Like no one really gets to survive a possession. And he does. And so there's something really cool and also respectful that you walk away with Ash. Like, oh man, this guy, he can do it all. Like you can't kill this guy no matter what. The demon won and it's still lost. That's pretty cool. And whenever he gets dispossessed, whenever he goes to pick up the necklace he gave his girlfriend, it's laid out in the shape of a skull. Like they made a little shape of it. That's pretty sweet. Didn't have to do that, but if you're going to do it, go all the way, man. That's freaking sick.
It only works in this movie.
Only in this movie. Yeah. Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed. The other thing I like is actually genuinely love the final image. Like Ash has a chainsaw hand and a double barrel shotgun on a mount surrounded by knights screaming hail in front of a castle, and we're pulling back through it all. Like that is an epic freaking shot. Like I am jealous because as silly as the rest of this movie is, and even as silly as, parts of that shot are, it's still hella cool. What a great way to end the film.
Well, I mean, it's foreshadowed from the image we see earlier too. Yeah. So if you're paying attention and you see that image that of the person standing there with it's a silhouette, so you can't really tell what's in his hand. But now at the end of the film, you're like, oh, that's a chainsaw that was in his hand in that image we saw earlier. Oh, that's why he's saying no, because he realizes that was him in that image that we saw earlier. So yeah.
Pretty cool.
So great. It's a great way to end it. Great last image, like
100%.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I got. I think, I enjoyed it. I didn't know what to expect coming in, to be honest, because it's been so long since I watched it. I forgot how funny it was. And once the movie started and it was like kind of corny, and I actually literally stopped maybe 4 times in that first 8 minutes because I buy a Blu-ray and then I rip it so that I can put it on my digital media server. Every once in a while, you get a bad rip where things are out of sequence. And I had to keep stopping it to say, is this a bad rip? Is this the end? And it actually got shuffled to the beginning. And literally 4 times I stopped it and I was like, this is wrong. Like, what's happening? Before I finally pulled up, I think, the synopsis on Wikipedia, and I was like, does this all happen this fast? And it did. And I was like, okay, then we're good. We'll just move on. I was so confused. But yeah, man, I ended up having a really good time once it settled in, and I remembered like, oh yeah, this is just a silly fun time. So final thoughts.
What
man?
was the moment where you knew what it was?
Good question. I think it was deeper in. It might have been the hand sequence. I think that was when I finally was like, oh yeah, we're having fun. And I started laughing because it's so over the top. I mean, the hand gives him the finger, all of that, it steps in a mousetrap. Like this is all complete, hokey, silly, good time. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can enjoy his silly screams now and being over the top. Yeah, it took me a minute though. I'm embarrassed to say it took me longer than it should have.
For me, it was him playing the piano.
Oh crap! So right,
like very beginning, I was like, he's like playing this like dramatic, like operatic kind of thing. Like, what the hell is going on?
At that point, I was like, wait, it's just a bad movie. And then that was my fear. And then as it went on, I was like, oh, it's intentionally like being hokey. Okay. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Final word, final thoughts.
Oh, it's wonderful, fantastic. It's like a good example of having a vision and executing 100% on that vision. But then remembering that you want to leave people with something interesting. And so I love that kind of like, time dilation kind of situation we put him in. And there's a great ending to it. And, I don't know what the budget was for the film, but I think that they used it really well. And it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. I would definitely watch it again too, because it's really short, an hour, 20 minutes or something. So, yeah, I enjoyed it.
Nice. Very cool. What are you going to recommend this week?
I am surprised I haven't recommended this before, because I've talked about it before, but I mean, at least I'm searching and I don't think that I have. I'm going to recommend the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, which maybe I've just talked to you about it, but I remember that movie being the first movie in my life to stress me out so much that it affected how I lived, how I lived the rest of my day and maybe even week. It was so stressful, and I've been scared in movies before, and I remember seeing some scary movies when I was younger and it really affecting me and stuff like that. But this was, I'm a grown ass person watching this movie and I cannot breathe, and much less enjoy popcorn or something. Like, no way. So yeah, the 2003 Jessica Biel Texas Chainsaw Massacre is probably definitely in my top 5, easy, maybe top 3 scary films of all time. Yeah.
Dude, nice. Agreed. I watched the original when I was a kid. I was probably like 12 or 13. And I remember like that one freaked me out for sure. But I don't have like a special place in my heart for it, like most, horror fanatics do. And then watching that remake that you're talking about hooked me, like, no pun intended. And it's just, and it's so good. And I got to work with those same filmmakers. They're the ones who did the Friday the 13th remake. And that was really fun, to be on set with those guys. And like, I'm super impressed with that movie, and freaked me out too. Like, really well paced, doesn't waste a lot of time. Nice, good recommendation. I'll stop.
And being from Texas too, I'm like, oh man. Anyway, yeah.
So I'm going to recommend a movie called Baghead. This is a Duplass movie, and I think it balances really nicely the humor with horror. In fact, it's about a bunch of actors who go into the woods, into a cabin, to make their own movie to jumpstart their careers. And I think that's why it pairs really well with Evil Dead, 2. And it also stars Greta Gerwig. That whole crew used to run around together, it seems like. And so if you want to see an early Greta movie, as well as a really fun play on all the classic horror films like Evil Dead, you might have a really good time watching Baghead. I did. I think it's a wonderful film. Stay tuned for next week. We rewind the clock 6 years, and we're going to take a look at the original The Evil Dead, for a lot of reasons, which we'll probably touch on next week. So go find that streaming somewhere. I think it's streaming on like AMC, but also rental for like $3 or $4 on Amazon and whatnot. And so I'm sure we'll do that.
It's on Tubi, I think.
Oh, and it's on Tubi. Nice. With ads, right?
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. So stay tuned for that next week. And if you're enjoying the show, leave us a note, subscribe. Let us know if there's something you want us to cover that we haven't covered yet. We've done a lot of these, so, double check. and if you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/evildeadii.
And our quote of the day is from Sam Raimi. I'm too obsessed that the people who say critical things about me are right, even though I'm getting to do something I love. Is that it's a criticism of himself?
It kind of knocked me out when I read it. Doing something you love so hard, and then having people talk shit about you can really it's what is the old military jargon about? Like a little bit of poop in your ice cream ruins all the ice cream. Don't be the poop in my ice cream. And so I think we try, and I'm not saying we're 100% successful, but we try really hard to respect people's art, even if we don't like it. And this guy is wildly successful. He made perhaps the best Spider-Man movie of all time, Spider-Man 2. And so many other things. And was really like, whew, having someone, yeah. I think I just understand that whatever inner voice that's criticizing and looking for reasons to say you're shit, but still trying to hold on to that thing you love. Oh,
it's so good. Yeah, I had to read it multiple times because I was, normally when we do quotes, it's here's a thing to motivate you forward that this person has figured out and mastered or something. And with this, it's like, no, this is a current, this quote is, this is a current thing I'm battling with, from a guy who is, like you said, wildly successful, has made great movies. And maybe some that we wouldn't like, but like still is really good at what he does. And I think that we, as a society, specifically, like, we are looking for that person who cannot fail all the time. We are always looking for the next Michael Jordan. We are always looking for the next Babe Ruth. We are always, but for someone like Sam Raimi, who has done so much, it's crazy to think that person who's been so successful has these feelings of inadequacy based upon what other people who have done nothing with their lives could possibly say about him. Or maybe they've not done nothing, but have done, less creative stuff with their lives than what he's done. And yet that affects him. It's, it's just interesting. It's just really interesting. And you're right. It does put in perspective, you got to just turn off the world and do what you love to do, Wow. That's a great quote.
It's so vulnerable. I love it. I think that's just one of the more honest things I've heard a director ever say. Yeah.
Yeah. Good on you, Sam.
Well
Thank
done.
you for doing what you do, Sam, because we love all your films. Really, we do. We think that you're great at what you do. And if you think we're good at what we do, let's see what I did there. Please subscribe, review us where you get your podcasts, all that stuff. And if there's a film you'd like to see us pick apart or talk about or anything, please let us know. Maybe one day we'll do it. Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.